Action. Hello, winter watering. How do you go about it? How do you know what needs watering, what doesn't? Do you need to water in winter? Yes, is the answer. You often do, but there's all sorts of intricacies to it, and let's go just through it just swiftly. One is things that you're overwintering. So, for instance, things like these pelargoniums, these are zonal geraniums. I don't really water these unless it's getting, say, late February, early March, and it's really warm and dry. Then I might start watering them, particularly if I start to see them, the buds swelling or leaves starting to emerge. Then I start watering them. Things that I've potted up, for instance, this is something I've divided, I've potted up, and I'm starting to grow it now in the greenhouse. Yeah, of course I want to water this, and I've potted this up, but it's still I can tell by the weight that it's lighter than it would normally be wet, and the only way you get to know by the weight whether it's wrong or right is just experience. So you and again, that can change through different growing media. So for instance, if you've just switched from peat-based compost to peat-free compost, the weight is going to be different, and it takes a bit of getting used to what that is. So generally what you would do is you would give your plant a thorough water through, let it drain for a few minutes, and then you would just fill the weight, and you go and just try and mentally think, right, that's the sort of weight. And then you, when you come round each time, when it's starting to feel light in comparison to what you remember, you then water it thoroughly again, and again you check the weight, make a mental note, and then you go off. That's how you sort of get used to how heavy things should be. So here's an example of something you could have inside the home, in the greenhouse, or outside. Just a simple potted up plant, and it's still in leaf, so it's going to want watering. I'm feeling the weight, and actually I can feel by this that it's probably about, it's moist, it's not wet, it's not like it's just been watered, but it is moist. So I've got a moisture meter, but I'll show you, if you haven't got one of them, how you would sort of feel. So you make sure you've got a clean, dry finger. You stick your finger in for something this size, down to about the knuckle, say, and if it still feels moist, not dry down there, then you're probably okay and can get away with just leaving it. And let's check this. So I've got a moisture meter, and there's a couple of different types like this on the market. I will put a link in the description below to where you can get hold of these. And I'm going to click it. This does pH, and it also does moisture. So I'm going to click it onto moisture, and then I'm going to put it down, and I'm going to need to make sure these tips are in, you know, sort of a, like I say, a similar depth down to what I was just doing. And then there we should see that showing, yeah, just a little bit dry. And then if you're unsure, clean it off and pop it in there. And then you see that's showing on the border of moist and dry, which sounds about right. And that's probably where I want it, to be honest with you. I'll give this another few days and check it again maybe, because I don't want to overwater things during winter and have just them rot off or not be happy. Bear in mind the temperatures at night, or even in the day for that fact, can be very cold, and roots sitting in wet, cold compost aren't happy. They can rot off or just not perform correctly. One thing I would mention using a moisture meter, that if your compost is absolutely dry as a bone, you probably won't get a very good reading. I'm trying to force it in there. You see, the reading hasn't really changed, okay? And that's because it needs a bit of moisture for the sensor to work. Same with the pH reader. Quite often you have to moisten the soil before you put it in to get a pH reading. And there's some which do pH and there's some which just do moisture. The same would go as if you've got like a a temperature thermometer. They work better if the whatever you're taking the temperature of on the soil is a bit wet. Okay, so that's sort of doing it by weight, doing it with your finger, doing it with a moisture meter. The overwintering stuff, generally don't touch until it starts growing again. The stuff in pots or even in borders, it can be. Just check. If it's in leaf growth, then you want to water it. If it's not in leaf growth, then just leave it unless buds are starting, like I said with the Pelagonias, unless buds are starting to swell. The only thing I would say is if it's sort of late autumn, so I'm mainly talking about winter watering here, but late autumn, sometimes there is an advantage to watering things which may have, which you might not think of. So things like camellias, rhododendrons, stuff like that, just to stop them dropping their buds in the spring, because there's a phenomenon where things which bud up in the autumn, if they don't get enough water in the autumn, they can drop their buds. And I wouldn't rely on rain. So let's quickly go into the garden and talk about that. So you're on wobble cam now, and I'm in the garden, and talking about rain is sometimes it's really difficult with rain, and that can be your worst enemy sometimes, whatever time of year it is, because how much rain have you actually got? Has it been effective? Has the soil held on to it? Did the soil or compost get so dry that it actually couldn't take on the rain? Or, as what's quite common here, this sort of scenario, is that up against a fence you will get this essentially dry zone where the rain doesn't get to, and it's really dry, but at the front it can be nice and wet. So on our moisture meter at the moment, you can see that's showing as sort of between dry and moist, which sounds about right because I haven't done any watering here. We haven't actually, although it's damp just from the air, we haven't had any rain. So you can see there. And then I'm going to try it at the back there if it's going to let me. And you can see it's a lot drier, and I haven't even gone right the way to the back there because I don't think it'll even give me an accurate reading as I get back there because it'd be so dry. And bear in mind, this bed is a bed that is designed to retain water. That's what all this vermiculite does. So that's something to really bear in mind, is that there could be areas that don't capture the water. The problem with using in the winter water from your water butt is it's going to be freezing cold. Even at midday it can still be cold, so that's not a great thing to be putting on plants. So this is where it gets tricky. I'm going to use warm water from indoors. Now, water out the cold tap is still going to be cold, so I need to sort of mix it half warm, half cold. So obviously if I had massive amounts to do, that's pretty expensive way to do it, because you're paying to heat the water and you're paying for the water. One way you can get non-freezing water to water your plants with is when you're taking a shower, have a shower with a bucket or two, and that'll capture a bit of water as well that you can then pour into your can or directly onto the plants. Save a bit of money and water. So I'm going to go through now to the front of the house and fill up water from the kitchen. So I'm going to do sort of make the water in the can a warm mix of water, or just warm, sort of room temperature. Rather than freezing cold out the cold tap, I'm going to mix a bit of hot water with it and get it about that temperature. Because, yeah, you're going to really shock a plant if you water them with really cold water. The other thing to consider as well is the time of day you're doing it. If you're watering things early in the morning or late at night, that's going to again shock the plants. The late at the night one as well, those plants will be sitting, those roots will be sitting in cold, wet roots, and it's not good for them. So I would say that what you want to do is water them about midday, which would be the reverse of what you want to do in spring and summer, really. Lovely. So this hanging basket I've already watered with warm water, and you can see it's wet. So all I did was water it until water came out the bottom. This is a newly planted pot, so I'm just going to, I haven't watered, and you can see it's quite dry, so I need to water that. So first thing, remove the rose, don't need that. And now just gently watering the compost. See the moisture meter going up. Just make sure you're watering all the way around and making sure you get the edges as well. It's a good habit. It's not as bad in the winter, but it's a good habit to get into, to try and water the compost, not the leaves, because it's just, well, it's wasteful for water. Water just runs off elsewhere, and plants generally don't take in water through their leaves. They take it in through their roots, so you want to do that. And when to stop watering? Well, you're looking for water to start coming through the bottom of the pot if you can see. But if not, you just give it a little push and see what the weight is. But again, your moisture meter stuck in a few places at a few depths is going to tell you. And I think that feels pretty good to me. Okay, so houseplants, same principle as garden plants or plants in the greenhouse. If they've got leaf on, generally speaking, you'll want to water them. It's just the frequency will be a lot less, and you won't want them to be sitting in water, obviously. It's my little houseplant hospital here in the greenhouse. This is a Crushula money maker here. Actually, weight-wise, it's not too bad, but if it had got really hydrophobic, so for instance the compost had really dried out, like for instance here with this Echeveria, this is not liking the cold at all. I might have to take this indoors. So what you could do is sink it into a bucket of water like this. I'm not letting the rim of the pot go underwater, because all the compost will just fluff out and flow off the top. But if the compost was quite solid, like with plants you will quite often buy at a garden centre, you can let them, or when the water has sort of creeped its way up like it has now, you can let it sort of start to submerge a little bit, or entirely, even if the compost keeps it intact. I think that's enough for you though. I don't want you to be sitting too wet, and you're just making sure that it drains off. Now I tend to leave it, if it was a house plant, I tend to leave it in a sink or something for a few minutes, but that's probably about right. That, there we go. And that one, and then this one, again, I can treat exactly the same. There's no rule that says you have to water things with a watering can. Okay. And often you'll see it bubble, and that sort of lets you know the air's escaping and that actually is is taking on water and that it needed water. There we go. And I am sort of pushing some of these houseplants into the limit in the greenhouse here, because I'm just keeping it frost free. And you can tell by the redness, and some of these are sulking. I am absolutely pushing it, but I'll see how I get on. If they deteriorate any further, then I will have to bring them inside. It's just the problem is the space. So what if you're going to sow, or have got some seedlings coming up? How should you water those? Well, depends on the temperature. Depends, again, a moisture meter would be quite useful there actually, because you don't want to be disturbing them by lifting them, checking the weight, and you don't really want to be sticking big fat finger in there. So moisture meter will work really well, and just sort of gauge, you want them in that sort of top end, dry end to moist probably. You don't want them wet. Again, temperature is going to be all about it. If you've got a really high heated greenhouse or indoors, then it's going to be totally different to if you've got a very cool greenhouse or they're outside in the winter. So yeah, it's just all to do with temperature really. You've just got to make the decisions that way. Cut.